in Indian philosophy in general, you can say that it consists of what is called darshanas. I mean, studying Indian philosophy is studying darshanas. Now, what is darshana? Darshana is generally translated as schools of philosophy. So it is not studied author-wise, but school-wise. And every school has its own history, and different authors contribute to their own school. So generally, you will not find an Indian philosopher who does not belong to any school and he is just an independent philosopher. Even if somebody thinks independently and presents his philosophy independently, he will be attributed to some school. I mean, this has been the practice, and he also will feel uncomfortable if he is not attributed to any school. So he will also express his own identity as belonging to a particular school. Even a skeptic, I mean, we will see that in Indian philosophy there were some skeptics who it is very difficult to, I mean, a pure skeptic cannot belong to any particular school of thought. Of course, among skeptics there can be, I mean, skeptics themselves can constitute a school. That is another thing. But here we don't find like that. I mean, there are some skeptics who are Buddhists. There is a skeptic who belongs to Lokayata school, and there is a skeptic who belongs to Vedanta school. So this is how, I mean, Indian philosophy becomes very different from Western philosophy. And in these darshanas, you can say that in every darshana there is an epistemology, there is ontology, and there is approach to human life or values, you can say. And without that, a darshana cannot be complete. That is, there must be some theory of knowledge and what is called theory of pramanas. The word pramana I will be using often in this. Pramana, which means either means to knowledge, or sometimes the word used in the sense of knowledge itself, not means to knowledge but knowledge. So every system has every school has some system of pramanas, some system of the nature of reality. It is through pramanas, through those means to knowledge, what we know, what is the nature of that we know. And ultimately this knowledge is not supposed to be for itself. It has to serve some purpose in life. So what are the goals of life? What is the ultimate goal of life? And how is that knowledge and those pramanas and that nature of reality relevant to that goal of life? So this is how a school of philosophy becomes complete, so to say. And therefore it is very difficult to study epistemology in isolation from ontology and view of life. But still we have to do that kind of exercise. We have to bracket some of the ontological or metaphysical ideas, but whenever they are relevant, they are important for understanding the approach to knowledge, we will take into account the ontological approach or approach to life also. So the lectures that I have prepared, they are all in PowerPoint presentation form, and I actually in these days I have developed this practice of writing the whole lecture and just reading it and at the same time showing it. So I have prepared these lectures in this way, but when I read it, the first lecture yesterday, I found that I am taking for granted so many things, and I will have to stop many times and explain some of the terms, and particularly because the audience doesn't have background in philosophy to a large extent. Very few of you, some of you have background in philosophy, but that background is mostly in Western philosophy. So so many things need to be introduced afresh, and therefore I will now, each lecture was supposed to be 1.5 hour lecture, but I am now splitting that lecture into two parts. So first part I will present in the morning session and the second part in the afternoon session, and so side by side there will be discussion, not a separate discussion session as such. Only then I think I will be able to do some justice to the topics. So I will start reading and I will be stopping in between and using the board for explaining some of the things. Let us see. I mean, it is all a kind of experiment, and the success depends on me and you also. I will just request you. Today I have sent the remaining 4 lectures, PPTs. So I have sent all the PPT files of all the 7 lectures to you. So as far as possible, if you just go through the particular PPT file before you come to the class, it will give some idea, and now whatever I speak will be a kind, maybe repetition for some, but even then it will help in clarifying the things. So I will begin. That, I mean, they will help in that. In the afternoon, I think that will be done. So here what we are doing is, today we will be concerned mainly with Nyaya school, and that is because in the history of Indian philosophy it was Nyaya who introduced epistemology as such. That is, primarily Nyaya was just an epistemological school, the school concerned with pramanas and also some related things, that is how through these pramanas one can explain certain things, one can establish what one believes or what one accepts, and how to enter into debate, how to win over the opponent in the debate, and all these the tricks of winning over the debate, and so on and so forth. So that was the subject matter of Nyaya system, and so I will be, I mean, I think most of the points are there. So in the first stage, it is important to point out the peculiarities of Indian conception of knowledge, which are relevant on the background of Western epistemology. There are difficulties in identifying the concept of knowledge or its exact analog in Indian epistemological literature. So in English, what we call knowledge, what is the exact word for knowledge in Indian tradition? The word jnana, many times the word jnana is used. So in many Indian languages, the word jnana is used, not I mean through Sanskrit, as an equivalent of the English word knowledge. About the usage of the English word knowledge, we can say that there is nothing such as true knowledge and false knowledge. In Western epistemology, when we talk of knowledge, we do not talk of true knowledge and false knowledge, valid knowledge, invalid knowledge. Any piece of knowledge by its very essence must be true if it is a piece of knowledge, and not true if it is not true. Then we do not say it is untrue knowledge or false knowledge, but we may simply say it is not knowledge at all. But in Sanskrit epistemological literature, particularly in the epistemological systems such as Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, Buddhism and Jainism, so these words again you have to remember names of the schools. Nyaya and Vaisheshika are 2 different schools, but they are, you can say, sister schools, and they support each other to a large extent. Vaisheshika school is mainly concerned with ontology, the nature of reality, whereas Nyaya school is mainly concerned with knowledge. But at the same time, Nyaya system accepted some ontology, which it borrowed, so to say, from Vaisheshika system, and Vaisheshika system had its epistemology, which was to some extent similar to Nyaya epistemology. Then Purva Mimamsa. Now Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa, these are two important schools. They are concerned with, Mimamsa here is mainly concerned with interpretation of Vedas. That is, Purva Mimamsa is concerned with interpretation of Vedas. Now, which part of Vedas? In Vedas, there are supposed to be, broadly speaking, two parts. One is concerned with ritual. Vedas are the scriptures of the say Vedic tradition or Aryan tradition, and in that there are two parts. One part is concerned with ritualism mainly, and the other part is concerned with knowledge of ultimate reality. So the first part, Purva Mimamsa, is concerned with the first part of Vedas, that is the ritualistic part of Vedas, and the other school is called Uttara Mimamsa, that is later Mimamsa. Earlier Mimamsa, Purva, the word Purva means earlier and the word Uttara means later. So earlier Mimamsa and later Mimamsa. Earlier Mimamsa is concerned with the earlier part of the Vedas, the interpretation of the earlier part of the Vedas, and Uttara Mimamsa is concerned with the later part of the Vedas. That is what is called Upanishads. You might have heard the word Upanishads, which is concerned with the knowledge of ultimate reality and liberation and all that. Then Buddhism and Jainism. So in these systems, the word jnana is used in value neutral sense. Value neutral sense means jnana can be true, jnana can be false. Whereas in English we say knowledge cannot be true or false. Knowledge is say justified true belief. Sometimes it is defined as justified true belief. So knowledge must be true. Otherwise it is not knowledge at all. It is just a belief but not knowledge. Whereas in this Indian school, the word jnana is used in value neutral sense, that is in the sense of cognition, you can say. So cognition can be true or false, and so that is, it is not necessary that jnana by its very essence must be true. As a result, the distinctions between yathartha jnana and ayathartha jnana. So these are again technical terms in Nyaya. Yatha artha means according to object. Literal meaning is according to object. So cognition according to object can be regarded as knowledge, and cognition which is not according to object, ayathartha, it is negation of yathartha. The word a is used in the sense of negation. So ayathartha jnana, that is jnana which does not accord with the nature of the object. Similarly, there is another pair, samyak jnana, mithya jnana, right knowledge, right cognition, wrong cognition. So true jnana, false jnana. So these are genuine distinctions. The scholars who are not clear on this distinction between jnana and knowledge translate this classification of jnana as the one between valid knowledge and invalid knowledge. So in many books on Indian philosophy, secondary sources in Indian philosophy, you will find this terminology which is misleading according to me. Valid knowledge, invalid knowledge, true knowledge, false knowledge, right knowledge, wrong knowledge. Even a scholar like J.N. Mohanty in his Gangesha's theory of truth was tempted to translate prama and aprama. Prama means you can say knowledge, and aprama is what is not knowledge or what is pseudo knowledge. We will come to that again when we talk about the theory of pramana. So he has translated prama as true knowledge and aprama as false knowledge. Of course, the verb jna is used in common parlance in Sanskrit in the sense to know. So there is a kind of ambiguity about the word jna itself, word jnana. For example, you find that in Shankaracharya, the Vedanta philosopher, he uses the word jnana in the sense of knowledge, not in the sense of cognition, which is value neutral. So this type of usage of the word jnana is also there in Sanskrit. So Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, the word jnana is used in the sense of a true cognition, that is cognition governed by a real object, which is called Vastu Tantra, governed by Vastu. Vastu means a real object, and not the cognition governed by subjective attitude. In the present course, however, we will not follow this value loaded usage of the word jnana, we will follow its value neutral usage. because we are not concerned with Vedanta school in this particular course. We will be talking about Buddhism, Jainism, Nyaya. All of them use the word jnana in value neutral sense. In English, the word cognition is used in such a value neutral sense, such that there can be true cognition as well as false cognition. Hence, for our course, I prefer to translate the word jnana as cognition. Like the word jnana, its synonym like buddhi and upalabdhi are used in Nyaya, Buddhist and Purvamimamsa tradition in value neutral sense, so that an instance of jnana or buddhi or upalabdhi. So these are some other synonyms which are used. So they are not supposed to be true by definition, but can be either true or false, depending upon their conditions, other conditions. In English, knowledge is supposed to stand for true belief or justified true belief. This leads us to the second difficulty in identifying the exact analog of knowledge in Indian tradition. The words such as knowledge or belief are used in the Western tradition in dispositional sense. So here the distinction between episodic sense of the words like know and dispositional sense is important. In Indian epistemological theories, on the other hand, talk primarily about cognitive episodes as being acceptable or otherwise, and not about knowledge or belief as dispositions. So, I mean, this distinction is important. When I say, suppose I say, I know Bhagavad Gita. So, this does not mean that at present I am aware of Bhagavad Gita as a whole. This only means that I have certain disposition, I have certain capacity to say reproduce what is, suppose you ask some questions about Gita, what is written there, what is the story of the Gita, whatever, then I am able to answer those questions. That is the only claim I am making. So, the knowledge claim does not imply that I am having a particular cognitive episode in my mind at this particular time, of which Gita is the object. So, this is the dispositional sense of the term knowledge. And this is how the word knowledge is generally used in English. Whereas here, when we talk about jnana, the word jnana is not used in the context of epistemology. The word jnana is not used in dispositional sense, but it is used in episodic sense. That is, when I say, I mean, in Sanskrit it will be ghatamaham janami. It will mean that, I mean, the literal translation will be that I am knowing the pot. Now here I am knowing the pot means I am aware, I am becoming aware of the pot at this point of time. So this is a kind of cognitive episode which is occurring in me. So that is the episodic sense of knowledge. And in Indian epistemology, mainly we are talking of episodic sense of knowledge rather than dispositional sense. The gravity of the issue was realized by a scholar like B.K. Matilal when he took the point made by Gilbert Ryle seriously, that the words believe and know do not refer to acts or episodes but to dispositions. To be more precise, believe is a tendency verb and know is a capacity verb. On the other hand, the verb jna is in a sentence like ghatamaham janami refers to the act of becoming aware or to an episode of cognizing a pot, and not to the knowledge of a pot in its dispositional sense. Since the concept of jnana in its episodic form is foundational to the whole of Indian epistemology, one has to be careful in reading Western epistemological issues in the literature of Indian epistemology and vice versa. Hence, following Matilal, we will use the word cognition in episodic sense for the word jnana of Indian epistemology, and the word knowledge in episodic sense for the word prama of Indian epistemology. So, in Indian epistemology, we talk of prama. Prama is defined as, I mean, in one sense, it can be defined as yathartha jnana, that is, jnana which is in accordance with the nature of the object. So, every jnana is not prama, but that jnana is prama which is in accordance with the nature of the object. That is, true jnana is prama. one of the aspects of this difference between the two approaches to knowledge is that in Indian tradition, JTB definition of knowledge, that is knowledge as justified true belief, is not available. What can be available at the most is JTC definition, according to which Prama is justified true cognition. It can be argued that generally what we have in TC definition, what we have is PC definition, that is true cognition, and not even justified true cognition, that type of definition. So if you just go through the different definitions of Prama, and the Prama is again a technical term. Prama is what we achieve through Pramana, and Pramana is supposed to be the means to knowledge, and Prama is, you can say, is synonymous with knowledge. When we understand knowledge not in dispositional sense but in episodic sense. It can be argued that generally, okay, Prama or Pramana is defined as true cognition, samyak jnana, or true presentative cognition, yathartha anubhava. So again I will come to the distinction between presentative cognition and memory cognition. Anubhava, this is a Nyaya technical term, and Nyaya and many other systems distinguish between cognition, presentative cognition, that is something which gives us a fresh information, new information, that type of cognition, and memory cognition, where we are just recollecting what we have already known before or cognized before. So memory cognition is supposed to be repetitive in nature, and because of its repetitive character, many times it is not regarded as knowledge at all. It is not given the status of knowledge. It is so memory is not given the status of pramana, for example, or it is not given the status of prama, and therefore what gives us some information, that type of cognition is supposed to be anubhava, and the cognition which does not give any new information but is just repetitive is called smriti. Smriti is recollection, memory. And then when we are talking about prama or knowledge, what we are concerned with, we are not concerned with recollection at all, but we are concerned with anubhava type of cognition which gives us new information. And if that informative cognition is true, then we will say that it is knowledge. If it is not true, then we will say that it is not knowledge at all. So that is how the word anubhava becomes important, particularly in Nyaya tradition, and many other systems also follow that, except Jainism, that we will see in the lecture on Jainism. Though the two conceptions of knowledge are radically different in this way, I do not mean to say that there is incommensurability between the two epistemological traditions, that Indian tradition cannot talk about knowledge in dispositional sense, or that Western tradition cannot talk about knowledge in episodic sense. As Matilal has pointed out, the Nyaya analog of the Western conception of knowledge is not jnana or prama, but samskara. Samskara is the impression generated by an episodic cognition or on mind, by awakening which memory cognition becomes possible. On the other hand, though knowledge may not be called an event in English, coming to know, for example, can be treated as an event. Also, there are Western philosophers like Peter Geach who talk about mental acts in general and acts of judgment in particular. So one can talk about say episodic sense of knowledge in Western philosophy and dispositional sense of knowledge in Indian philosophy also. So they are not completely unrelated. Third difficulty is about the relation between cognition and a proposition. In the Western epistemology, knowledge in the sense of knowledge that is propositional. So we distinguish between knowing how and knowing that. So knowing how is not propositional, but knowing that I know that so and so. So that so and so will be a proposition. The JTB definition of knowledge too refers to a belief which is necessarily expressible in the form of a proposition. In Indian epistemology, when knowledge is defined as a true cognition, a cognition is not necessarily expressible in the form of a proposition. This can give rise to the problem of judging a piece of cognition to be true or false. So, if a cognition can be expressed in the form of a proposition, then we can say that a cognition is true if the proposition which expresses that cognition is true, and a cognition is false if the proposition which expresses the cognition is false. But suppose we talk about cognition which is not expressible in the form of a proposition at all, then how to talk about truth or falsehood of that cognition? This will be a problem. According to the correspondence theory of truth, truth value of a piece of cognition or a belief can be judged by comparing the elements and the structure of the cognition or belief with those of the facts. The structure of the cognition or belief can be understood when the cognition or belief is expressed in language. For example, subject and predicate refer to the property bearer and its property as given in the reality. Similarly, a relational form of proposition refers to the relations and the corresponding relata in reality. So, it is we generally say that proposition corresponds to facts or states of affairs, and so the proposition has a particular structure. Maybe it is a subject predicate structure or relational structure, and corresponding to that structure or language reflects reality, and therefore the structure in reality is reflected in language, or the structure of language actually refers to the structure in the reality. So, in language we have subject predicate structure, so corresponding to that in reality also there is some similar structure, that is property and property bearer. So, there are property bearers, that is say substance and quality. There are substances which have qualities. So, substances are the property bearers and qualities are the properties. Or just as in language we have relational propositions, so in reality also there are relational complexes. So, this is how we compare cognition with language, with reality, and on the basis of that we decide whether a given piece of cognition is true or false. So, Nyaya Vaisheshika system accepts this model in its analysis of knowledge. Though Nyaya Vaisheshika thinkers do not accept cognitions themselves having a propositional form, the cognitions according to them can generally be expressed through propositions, and the structure of those propositions can be compared with the structure of the reality, on the basis of which the cognitions can be judged to be true or false. So, this is again another issue in Indian philosophy, whether cognition has a form or not, and Nyaya Vaisheshikas hold that cognition itself does not have any form. It has an object but not a form. So, whereas there are some systems like Buddhism, in Buddhism there are many sub-schools which hold that cognition has a form. Similarly, we can say in Sankhya system there is a view that the cognition assumes the form of the object. So, whereas Nyaya Vaisheshikas do not accept this, but at the same time when it is the question of expressing the cognition, it is expressed in the form of a proposition. It must be expressible, otherwise it is not a cognition that is proper, which can be judged in terms of true or false at all, or prama or aprama at all. So, if any cognition has to have the status of prama or aprama, that is knowledge or pseudo knowledge, then it should be expressible in the form of a proposition. And of course, they will not say proposition as such, but they will say visheshana visheshya, qualification and qualified. In every cognition there are these two elements, something is qualified by something, and then corresponding to that, if in reality also we have something which is qualified by something in the same way, then we will say that the cognition is true. So here we can take the example of an illusion. Now, one of the famous examples of illusions is conch shell and silver. There is a piece of this conch shell, and from a distance somebody sees that, and he and he thinks, or he has an illusion that this is silver, this is a piece of silver. Now what kind of cognition he will have? That this is silver. When in fact this is conch shell. Now the cognition has a particular form. This is silver, which means now in this there is this duality of something is qualified and something is the qualification. This is silver actually means this object is qualified by silverness, being silver. So this being silver is the qualification. It is called Visheshana, and this is Visheshya, that is the qualified. Now in reality, what is the situation? This is conch shell. Now in this is common. That is, so there is some object, this something is qualified by something, all right, but I am thinking that this is qualified by silverness, but as a matter of fact this is not qualified by silverness, but it is qualified by conch shellness. So the property, are you getting or no? I mean, I am just describing the situation of illusion. Somebody has an illusion, he sees a conch shell, but from a distance, because it is glittering, shining, he thinks that, oh, it is a piece of silver. Now, this is common. This is silver. He has this illusion of this form. This is silver. When in reality, this is conch shell. So he attributes some qualification to the object, what he sees. That is, the subject part is common, and he attributes some predicate to it. In reality, something else qualifies this, namely being conch shell. This particular property qualifies the object. So because what one in the cognition, what one has as a qualification is not the qualification in reality, therefore this cognition is false. Although this element is common to both, what is qualified is common, but what qualifies is not common in reality and in cognition. In cognition, silverness qualifies this, in reality, conch shellness qualifies this. And so that is how Naiyayikas understand. So for them, cognition is a complex of qualified and qualifier, and reality also is a complex. And if in cognition the qualification that I have is not there in reality, but some other qualification is there, then the cognition is false. Later on I may realize that, oh, this is not silver, this is conch shell. So at that time my cognition will be of the form, this is conch shell, where in reality also it is conch shell, in my cognition also the same qualification is there, so my cognition will be a true cognition. So truth and falsehood of a cognition can be understood in this way according to Nyaya. So it presupposes a certain structure of reality, that in reality there is some kind of complexity of qualification and qualified. And in cognition also there is a kind of complexity. That is the content of the cognition. The cognition itself is not complex, but the content of the cognition is supposed to be complex according to them. So, if the complexity of the cognition and complexity of the reality matches, then the cognition is true. If it does not match, then the cognition is false. Okay. Now, but there are systems of Indian philosophy which do not accept this potentially linguistic structure of language, of knowledge. Hence, they have to take a different stand on the question of truth and falsehood of cognitions. Now, there are, for example, Advaita Vedanta. The systems such as Advaita Vedanta talk of objectless cognition, about which the question of truth or falsehood does not arise, and even such a cognition is sometimes called ultimate pramana. That is something which reflects ultimate reality. So, this is Nyaya position, but there are other positions. Now, Nyaya position is, you can say, is close to common sense position. But Vedanta position is that ultimately, what is the nature of reality? It is consciousness, and that consciousness is without an object. And when I reach that particular state of consciousness, then I have insight into the true nature of reality. So, in a sense, I have knowledge at that time. I have true insight into the nature of reality, but then what is the content of that? It has no complexity, it has no object at all. So, there are systems which talk about consciousness without object, where that consciousness is regarded as supreme pramana, highest form of knowledge, and so on and so forth. Then in Buddhism, they distinguish between non-judgmental and judgmental cognition. So, this is again another important area. According to Buddhists, now suppose there is an object, maybe the same conch shell, silver, whatever. When I become aware of that object, at the first instance, at the first moment, I have just the object, awareness of the object in its pure and simple form. It does not have any kind of complexity at all. It does not have any kind of propositional character or this property bearer type of complexity at all. Now, at the next stage, at the next moment, I try to interpret that object. I may say, even in the case of the so-called true cognition, suppose in fact there is conch shell and ultimately I cognize it as conch shell only. But at the first moment I do not cognize that conch shell. I am just aware of something which is a unique particular, and that is without any kind of conceptual structure. No concept is involved in that cognition. At the next moment, I may conceptualize, I may say this is a conch shell. So, that is the difference between non-judgmental perception and judgmental perception. At the first instant, I have non-judgmental perception. At the second moment, I have judgmental perception. Now, there is the sea of difference between Buddhist approach and Nyaya approach on this. Buddhists say that whatever awareness I get at the first moment, the object is given to my consciousness as it is, without any kind of modification, without any kind of fabrication, as it is. And therefore, that particular cognition, first moment of cognition, that can be regarded as true cognition, it can be regarded as prama, it can be called as knowledge, and so on and so forth. But it does not have any propositional structure, it does not have any complex structure. At the next moment, I apply some concept. Now, this concept, according to Buddhists, is mental construct. It is not something which is there in reality, which reflects the nature of reality. So, in reality, there is nothing like conch shellness, which is common to all conch shells. So, this is something mentally constructed, and then I attribute it to what is there. I superimpose it on the reality. So, whatever I have at the second moment is a kind of corrupt form of cognition. It does not reflect the reality as it is, but in that I have introduced my own mental constructs, and therefore it is not prama at all. So, at the second moment it is not prama at all. Only at the first moment I had prama, when I was just aware of whatever is given without attributing any concept. Okay. Whereas for Naiyayikas, the reality is complex, and in reality there is something like conch shell, conch shellness. There are universals, and those universals I am just describing by using words. So, this is not my own contribution to reality. The words and concepts and so on and so forth, they are derived from the reality itself. This is Nyaya view, and therefore for them this second moment is important. That really reflects the reality as it is. In the first moment, what happens? For Naiyayikas, earlier they did not have this distinction between non-judgmental and judgmental at all. It is because of the influence of the Buddhists, they had to take serious note of this distinction, and they accepted this first non-judgmental type of perception. But for them, this non-judgmental perception, in that also we must cognize universals. In that also we must cognize particulars. We must cognize the relation between universals and particulars. But we do not cognize them as qualifications. That is, this qualified relation is not cognized. So, this is how Naiyayikas later on accepted non-judgmental perception there, but they did not give it the status of pramana. For them, judgmental perception can be regarded as prama, knowledge. Non-judgmental perception cannot be regarded as prama or knowledge. This much is, I think, sufficient. I will proceed now. So, under the influence of Buddhism, Naiyayikas also had to accept non-judgmental perception, but they conceived it differently. According to them, non-judgmental perception just provides a raw material for the judgmental perception. In itself, it is neither true nor false. In this way, we have to be a bit cautious while discussing Indian theories of knowledge. We have to keep in mind that it has its own specialities which are not always analogous to the Western theories of knowledge. In this course, we are going to study the theories of knowledge developed by three philosophical schools, or darshanas as they are generally called, namely Buddhism, Jainism and Charvaka. So, now I come to this idea of darshanas. So, why these schools? Now, these schools again, I have not given here the list of schools, but many times we talk of 9 darshanas, out of which 6 darshanas are called orthodox and 3 darshanas are called heterodox. Okay. And here orthodox is the translation of astika, and heterodox is the translation of nastika. Astika, it means orthodox systems. There are 6 orthodox systems which consist of 3 pairs, you can say. That is Nyaya Vaisheshika, then Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa, and Sankhya Yoga. So these 6 systems, 6 schools are called orthodox schools, and orthodox here means they accept the authenticity of Vedas. Vedas as the scripture they accept as authority. And Nastika, which means heterodox. So the 3 systems are called heterodox systems: Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvaka or Lokayata. So this is just the background information, and we are mainly going to concentrate on these 3 systems, which are heterodox systems, or which do not accept the authenticity of Vedas. So Indian philosophy has developed through darshanas, which are popularly called schools or systems of Indian philosophy. These schools have been grouped or classified in various ways. One of the socially significant ways of classifying the schools of Indian philosophy is into orthodox and heterodox. Orthodox schools are those which believe in the authenticity of the Vedas. Heterodox schools are those which do not believe in it. Belief in the authenticity of Vedas represents a world view and the view of life which promotes the system of rituals such as sacrifices, including animal sacrifice, and the static social order of Varna and caste, consisting of the hierarchy based on birth. The schools which did not believe in the Vedas opposed the ritualism of sacrifices and also the hierarchical social order. Different heterodox systems did this in different ways. Vedic ritualism was criticized from within the Vedic tradition as well. That is, when we say that these are astika systems, that is orthodox systems, they accept the authenticity of Vedas, but all of them are not alike. That is, they do not accept the authenticity of Vedas also with the same intensity. So there are internal tensions and differences in degrees among the orthodox systems also, but we are not going to consider that. By the 1st century BC, there was a theory of debate. Now I am coming to Nyaya. There was a theory of debate which also dealt with correct and incorrect application of pramanas. We find it in the medical treatise called Charaka Samhita. This theory was the early stage of what later on developed as Nyaya Darshana. The Nyaya Darshana had its view of the world also, which it borrowed from another theory called Vaisheshika. This further gave rise to a joint system called Nyaya Vaisheshika. Hence, Nyaya epistemology can be regarded as the forerunner of all epistemologies in Indian philosophy. Other philosophical traditions for developing their own epistemologies either borrowed them from Nyaya or developed them as alternatives to Nyaya or modifications of Nyaya. Of course, this relation between Nyaya and other systems was not unilateral. Just as the epistemologies of other systems were influenced or affected by Nyaya, the Nayayikas had to develop or modify their epistemological views in the light of the views of other systems. We are not going to discuss this latter aspect in this course. So, how Nyaya system, the epistemological system itself, interacted with other systems and developed through the interaction. I mean, this is a different topic altogether. So now we are concentrating on Nyaya theory of knowledge. In Sanskrit, the word pramana, which is derived from the verb pra plus ma, has two meanings. One is true cognition, that is knowledge, and means to true cognition, that is means to knowledge. In early Nyaya literature, we find the word pramana used in both ways. For instance, sometimes veridical perception is called pratyaksha pramana. So pratyaksha, now again these words pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, these are different pramanas which are accepted in Nyaya. These are the four pramanas which are accepted in Nyaya. So pratyaksha means perception. So when the word pratyaksha pramana is used, it is used sometimes in the sense of non-defective sense organ, which is a means to veridical perception. So that is pratyaksha pramana. But with the development of their epistemology, Naiyayikas distinguished more sharply between what they call prama, that is knowledge, and pramana. So that is again a very important technical distinction that Naiyayikas introduced, pramana and prama. Pramana is a means to knowledge and prama is knowledge. So in the case of all the four pramanas, they distinguish between what is a means and what is the resultant knowledge. In order to understand the Nyaya conception of knowledge, that is prama, one has to distinguish between presentative cognition, that is anubhava, and recollection, that is smriti. This distinction was important for Naiyayikas because they, like the philosophers of many other schools, did not want to give the status of knowledge to memory. Indian epistemologists generally held that one can claim to be knowing something only when one is cognizing it afresh or anew. If one is remembering which one has already known before, then one cannot be said to be knowing it at that time. While discussing knowledge, Naiyayikas were concerned with presentative cognition. Hence, they defined prama as true presentative cognition, yathartha anubhava. Yathartha, yatha artha means according to the object, according to reality, and anubhava. So, yathartha anubhava prama. This is the definition of prama. Yathartha means true. Literally, yathartha means in accordance with the object. Here, Naiyayikas are accepting correspondence theory of truth. The question is whether this theory can be applied to memory cognition. So, I mean, these are some of the arguments why memory cognition cannot be accepted as knowledge. Though a memory cognition can also be called true or false, the way a memory cognition can be true is different from the way presentative cognition can be true. Correspondence theory of truth cannot be strictly applied to memory cognition. Truth of a memory cognition is not determined by the existence of the object it claims to remember, but the content of the cognition it records. So, this is one of the reasons why memory is not regarded as a form of knowledge. Suppose there is a conch shell before me, but because of its glittering appearance, I have an illusion that it is a piece of silver. This illusory cognition is a presentative cognition, but will not be called knowledge because it is a false cognition. Now, suppose after 1 hour I report to my friend that 1 hour before I saw a piece of silver. This is a report based on my memory cognition. This memory cognition will be treated as true memory cognition because it is according to the cognition I had before, though not according to the object. So, truth of a memory cognition and truth of a presentative cognition, they are not of the same type. One more point relevant for the Nyaya conception of truth is that when Naiyayikas talk of truth or falsehood of a cognition, they have a proposition-like structure of cognition as well as of reality in mind. Though they do not officially grant that cognition itself has a form or a structure, the object of cognition, according to them, has a structure. If the structure of the object tallies with the structure of reality, the cognition is said to be true, otherwise false. This point I have already explained. Broadly speaking, the structure of the object and also the reality can be expressed in terms of property and property bearer, dharma and dharmin, or qualification and qualified, visheshana, visheshya. Our cognitions are of the form A is so and so, which means A is qualified by being so and so. For example, I may perceive a glass and have a cognition of the form this is a glass, which means that this thing is qualified by glassness. This is a true cognition because the structure of the object of the cognition tallies with the fact that the thing before me possesses the universal property, namely glassness. In the case of erroneous perception, the observer sees a property in a thing which is not there in the thing. For example, one sees silver in place of a conch shell. There one has the cognition of the form this is silver when the fact is that the thing before the observer is not silver. When the person goes near and observes keenly, the error will be removed. The person then will have perception of the form this is conch shell. Nayayikas observe that here the property bearer, this, is common in both the cognitions and the corresponding facts. The error was in the cognition of the property and it is removed. But the property called silverness, which the observer saw there, is not totally absent from the world. Now this is the next point. That is, okay, when there is actually a conch shell and I see that by mistake I think that it is silver, I have an illusion, and there I said that there is something, I mean this is a conch shell and I perceive this as silver. So the property bearer this is common to both the cognitions, but what about silverness? Silverness which I superimpose on conch shell, is it real or unreal? This was one of the issues in theories of error in Indian philosophy. Now there were Buddhists, for example, idealist Buddhists, they said that this silverness is a mental construction which I am superimposing. It is not real at all. It is just a form of my mind, form of consciousness. Whereas realists like Nayayikas, they would say that no, even that silverness is not unreal. It is not my mental construct. Even the silver that I see is derived from my memory cognition, means I have seen it somewhere before. So even today it is somewhere there. So silver is also not unreal. This is also not unreal. Only there is some kind of miscombination, wrong combination. I mean, the silverness is actually somewhere else. It is not here, but I am cognizing it here. So this is how Nayayikas interpret error, erroneous cognition. The property called silverness, which the observer saw there, is not totally absent from the world, nor is it observer's mental creation. Only the observer saw it in a wrong place or in a wrong way. Hence, according to Nyaya, an erroneous perception is a case of seeing a thing otherwise, that is, anyatha khyati. In this sense, the Nyaya theory of perceptual error is called anyatha khyati theory of error. Given the nature of knowledge as true presentative cognition, the next question is how many ways of knowing the things as they are there? This is the question about the number of pramanas. Different schools of Indian philosophy accept different schemes of pramanas. The major schools and the schemes accepted by them can be shown in tabular form as follows. So there were some skeptics who said that there are no pramanas at all. So number of pramanas will be 0 for them. But we are going to see that the skeptics arose in three schools: Charvaka, Buddhism, and Advaita Vedanta. Then Charvaka, as it is popularly understood, accepted one pramana, namely perception. But we will see that some sections accepted also inference with some restrictions. Buddhism accepted two pramanas, perception and inference. Now, without sharing the objects with each other, that is, the object of perception and object of inference cannot be the same according to Buddhism. Whereas, according to Naiyayikas, when many other schools which talk about perception and inference and other pramanas, for them we can know the same object through perception as well as through inference. We can, this is another point of controversy. We need not go into that. Whereas Vaisheshikas accept again two pramanas. So there are two systems which accept two and only two pramanas. One is Buddhism and the other is Vaisheshika. They accept perception and inference. But Vaisheshikas accept perception and inference with sharing of objects with each other. Then Jainism accepts two pramanas which they call direct and indirect. It is Pratyaksha and Paroksha. And again, indirect knowledge is further classified into many kinds, 5 kinds. Sankhya Yoga, these schools accept 3 pramanas: perception, inference, and verbal testimony. Nyaya accepts 4 pramanas: perception, inference, analogy, and verbal testimony. Analogy works as a means to the knowledge of word meaning relation. In Mimamsa, within Mimamsa here means Purva Mimamsa, although I talked about Purva Mimamsa and Uttar Mimamsa. When I use the word just Mimamsa, it is Purva Mimamsa. Within Purva Mimamsa there are 2 subschools. Actually there are more than 2, but main subschools are 2. One is called Prabhakara, because the the originator of the school was Prabhakara, and the other is called Bhatta, because the originator of the school was Kumarila Bhatta. Now they had different views about the number of pramanas. According to Prabhakara school, there are 5 pramanas: perception, inference, analogy, verbal testimony, and implication. Implication is the translation of Arthapatti, which amounts to postulation of something out of explanatory necessity. And Bhatta school of Mimamsa accepts 6 pramanas: perception, inference, analogy, verbal testimony, implication, and non-apprehension. Non-apprehension is again another important pramana through which one knows the absence of a thing. And this was one of the important issues in Indian philosophy. We will not be able to discuss it. How is absence of a thing known? And there are different views. What is the nature of the absence of a thing? Can we say that just as say a pot exists, similarly the absence of a pot, suppose there is no pot on this table, then can we say that the absence of a pot exists in the table in the same way in which the pot exists somewhere else? And secondly, when we talk about the absence of a pot, then how can we know that absence? This is the next question. So, this is an interesting area, but we don't have time to discuss that. Acceptance of a particular set of pramanas could be due to many reasons. It could be either because it is rooted in the tradition of the school, or because it is required by the particular worldview or the view of life advocated by the school, or it could be accepted purely on logical grounds. However, each school tries to establish that all the pramanas accepted by it are necessary. None of them can be dispensed with. it also tries to establish that the additional pramanas accepted by other schools are either not means to knowledge at all, or if they are reducible to pramanas already accepted by it. So this is how on the question of number of pramanas also there are controversies. When the system accepts a particular number of pramanas, it sticks to it that these and only these are pramanas, and none of them is redundant. That is, every pramana is necessary, it is required. And secondly, other systems accept, if suppose they accept some additional pramanas, then they are not needed really. They are reducible to the pramanas which we have already accepted, or those pramanas are not pramanas at all. I mean, in this way, controversies go on. So when Charvakas would say that Pratyaksha is the only pramana, they would say that Anumana is not pramana at all, and the pramanas accepted by other systems are not pramana at all. Or when say pramana like non-apprehension is accepted by some systems, by Kumari Bhatta Mimamsa, other systems will say that no, that is not required. We can explain the knowledge of absence without accepting non-apprehension as an independent pramana. So within our scheme of pramanas, we can explain the knowledge of absence. So in this way, controversies go on. Thank you.